Let's go ahead and get started. Once again, happy Friday to everyone. I hope you've had a wonderful week. This is the first session for the sixth grade um, session for the Georgia Milestones, but welcome to the Accessing the Georgia Milestones, Resources and Strategies for Math, Constructed Responses, and Extended Responses. I am Sawanda Coffee, the math mentor here at West Georgia RESA. And before we even get started, let me go ahead and put a disclaimer out. This webinar and the series of webinars that we're going to be providing are not in lieu of the webinars that the DOE are have out there for us to review, to use as resources as well. This is just another resource that you can have to refer back to for the question types that your students may see on the Georgia Milestones. Once again, this is the first session of the sixth grade series, and I'd like to start off by providing you with the purpose of these series. Again, is to provide new teachers, veteran teachers, administrators, just another resource that you will be able to preview assessment items that will be structured in the same manner as the Georgia Milestones. Due to the time frame of the webinars, we will only be able to review 1 to 2 items this month. We will only be able to get through one of the assessment items due to some of the initial things I'll have. The series is conducted each month for grades 3 through 10. So if you have other department members, staff members, family members that are teaching those grade levels, then of course, just have them to register for the webinar and join us each month. The format for each of the webinars will be the same each month. There will be a standard or a set of standards that we cover for the month, a lesson essential question, the standards for mathematical practice that are related to the assessment item that we're going to review, as well as the assessment items. And then I'll also try to provide you with some scored student work. Some norms that we have is, of course, you will be muted during the presentation. If you do have questions throughout, then of course just type those in. But the reason for you being muted is so we can decrease the background noise that we may experience in our locations. Once again, you may type in questions during the presentation. If I'm not able to address your questions, then what I will do is just, consolidate the questions and then answer them and provide the answers back to you via email. And at the end of each of the presentations, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia RESA site. If you go to the website up under the Services tab, and you'll see recorded webinars, these will be uploaded at the end of each session for you to always go back and access them. So if you're not able to join us each month, then just know that they will be available there for you to go back and review at your leisure. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Georgia Milestones real fast. There will be 3 item types that will be presented in some form or another. And those 3 item types is, of course, the selected response, which we all know as the multiple choice. That is for all content areas. Constructed response, that's for your ELA and your mathematics content areas. And then extended response, which is for ELA and also your mathematics content areas. If you've been reviewing some of the webinars, the most recent information that have come out as far as the definitions or the definitions for like constructed response, it is just a general term for assessment items that require the student to generate a response as opposed to actually just choosing one of a multiple choice answer. The extended response is items that require more elaborate answers and explanations for reasoning. There may be multiple ways of answering the question, and there may be multiple answers to the question. Writing prompts and the performance tasks that are located in the Georgia frameworks are examples of extended response items. So if order to help the students answer just the constructive response, I would advise, teachers to go ahead and look at some of those frameworks tasks and, start using those in your class to help better prepare your students to answer the constructive response. We were at a conference a few weeks ago, and Melissa Fincher, the Associate Superintendent for Assessment and Accountability, stated that as teachers and as administrators, what we want to aim to do when we're transitioning to better prepare our students for the Georgia Milestones is to use the constructive response items to guide the students into understanding the process that it takes to answer the question. Then what you want to do from that point is to lead them into being able to articulate their thought process into writing complete sentences, and then of course to actually answer those questions. Our standard and lesson essential question for today, we're going to be looking at 6.ns.1, and it says interpret and compute quotients of fractions and solve word problems involving division of fractions by fractions. So examples of that may be using visual fraction models and equations to represent the problem. Our lesson essential question is, how do we solve word problems involving division of a fraction by a fraction? First, let's talk about these standards for mathematical practice. What I will be sharing with you each month is a list of the standards for mathematical practice that are aligned to the assessment item that we're going to be reviewing. So as a teacher and even as an administrator, in the planning process, the teacher should plan to demonstrate the behaviors for addressing the standards for mathematical practice. Now, this can be added to your lesson plans as you prepare them each week, or if you do them by unit, and you want to actually prepare the questions that you want to ask the student to help facilitate that particular standard for mathematical practice. Constant demonstration of the standards for mathematical practice in your classes will, of course, drive your curriculum and your student achievement to a whole nother level. So let's look at some of those standards that are going to be addressed with the assessment item. Standard number 1, it says make sense of problems and persevere in solving those. So some teacher behaviors that are related to this is providing rich problems aligned to the standards. Also providing appropriate time for students to engage in the productive struggle of problem solving. I know as teachers, we sometimes hate to see or to allow the students to actually struggle, but we're seeing that that is a necessary teacher behavior that we need to be demonstrating in our classes to help our students to, just to kind of take ownership of their learning. Some teacher questioning or some questions that you may ask to address this standard is, what information do you have? How could you make this problem easier to solve? And also, as we're demonstrating the behaviors of the teacher, we also want to see some things going on with the students. So we want the students to be able to read the problem carefully, checking answers and making sure solutions are reasonable and make sense. This can be done with the individually, or if you allow your students to work as partners, this can be a time where they can actually check their answers against a partner and then have a conversation about, okay, well, do the answers make sense? Or if they come up with different answers, do my answer make sense, or does my partner's answers make sense? And I was just talking about that, discussing the meaning of the problem with classmates. I will also address at the end of the Standards for Mathematical Practice section what the TEKS, how that relates to these teacher behaviors and these student behaviors. The second standard that is going to be addressed from the SMPs is reason abstractly and quantitatively. Some teacher behaviors that we want to see as teachers and administrators is using thinking aloud strategies as they model problem solving. Of course, it is a very good strategy strategy to use as a teacher is allow the students to listen to you talk about your thought process. What is the process that you would take to answer? And then one step further is you take your thought process and articulate that into writing so the students will see it and then actually take them through the process of solving. Attentively listening for strategies students are using to solve problems. Once again, we have to allow our students to be able to think for themselves. We always want to understand where they are, and then we can kind of assist them. Or if another student is listening, maybe they can throw in some strategies to help that student. Some questions that we may ask is, what does the number blank represent in the problem? And can you make a chart, table, or graph? So think about these, and as we are going through these standards for mathematical practice, keep those in mind when we actually get to the assessment item. The student behaviors that we would like to see is taking quantities out of context and working with them, and we consider that to be decontextualizing. And secondly, putting quantities back in context to see if they make sense, which is contextualizing. That means if the student is able to read a word problem and be able to understand all aspects of that problem. Another standard is standard 4, model with mathematics, some teacher behaviors, providing opportunities for students to solve problems in real world contexts. Identifying problem-solving contexts connected to student interests. Now, this is maybe an area that we may feel that we need to grow in, and that is, of course, you have to know your students, and you have to know what are they interested in that will help in your content area for them to gain the knowledge that they need. So you may have some students that are interested in history. They may be interested, of course, in sports. Business, just making sure that you bring in those actual questions into the class that will help with the content that you're teaching. Some questions that you may ask is, can you write a number sentence to describe this situation? And why do your results make sense? This is always important that we go back to this, is getting the students to understand the answer and does it make sense in the context of the problem that they're trying to solve. Some student behaviors that we would like to see is making connections between different mathematical representations, whether it's concrete, algebraic, numerical, graphical, pictorial. Students are very in tune to those visual models that we may show them. So make sure you're incorporating those behaviors or allowing your students to demonstrate those. And our next standard is standard 5, use appropriate tools strategically. Um, this can be one that can be easily done, and I'm sure most of us have already done this, is making a variety of tools readily accessible to students and allowing them to select appropriate tools for themselves. You may have a resource table in your room. One thing I used to do is I would have bins, those plastic clear bins up under the students' desks, and I would fill them with all the tools that I know we would need throughout the year. It could be graph paper, it could be scissors, color pencils, crayons, calculators, whatever I felt that the students could use, straight edges. So make sure that you have those available to your students, because when they have the opportunity to use them, we want them to choose the appropriate one. Some questions that you may ask: how could you use manipulatives or a drawing to show your thinking? If you're not currently using manipulatives to help your students understand your concepts or the concepts that you're teaching, I would definitely get to a point of incorporating that into your lessons. They can be very enlightening for your students. What other resources could help you solve this problem? Now, this is a very good question to ask, because if a student can tell you what they need to actually answer the question, then you know they're on a great path to understanding exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Student behavior is using technological tools to explore and deepen understanding of concepts. A lot of our students are very savvy with the technology. They can show us a lot of things, but you have to, be willing to actually incorporate those, bring those into your classes. There are a lot of schools out there that are a bring your own device or bring your own technology type of school. So if you're not, you could be that starting person in your building to start incorporating those. And our last standard is standard 6, attend to precision. Some teacher behaviors is explicitly teaching mathematics vocabulary. Um, we want to definitely make sure that we're teaching vocabulary on a daily basis. It may be right after your warm up, your bell work. But we have to make sure that we are incorporating some time throughout our day or some block of our lesson where we're teaching that mathematics vocabulary. Requiring the students to answer problems with complete sentences, including units. This is one of those strategies that will help us to guide the students into that articulation I was talking about earlier after they've thought about the process to solve, but then taking that thought process and being able to write it into sentences. That is why that's very important. Some questions that we may ask is, what does the word blank mean? Explain what you did to solve the problem. Student behaviors is communicating precisely using clear language and accurate mathematics vocabulary. That goes back to the teacher behavior. If we explicitly teach the mathematics vocabulary, what we want to do is encourage our students to communicate that vocabulary in writing and use it correctly. Okay, we are about to look at the assessment item for this month. And before we go on to do that, one thing I will say about the standards for mathematical practice, there is a Georgia DOE grade level overview for each of the grade levels for grades 3 through 5th grade that has the S&Ps. But you can use that same rubric that's inside of the grades 3 through 5th for your 6th grade classes, just to kind of give you an idea of where you should be or what you should be using to help grow your students. All right, the assessment item is the area of a rectangular park is 3/5 square mile. The length of the park is 7/8 mile. What is the width of the park? And it says show your work. This month assessment item is from Engage New York. Now, each month, what I will be doing is promoting a recommended resource from the state. And this is one of those state resources that the Georgia DOE has said, has some great assessment items that we can review. So this month, everything is coming from Engage New York. What I would like for you to do as we go through this is try to answer the question yourself. As you do that, I also want you to reflect back on the standards for mathematical practice that we just talked about and how we could address those standards in the process of answering this question. Also, I want to make sure that standard number 1 and standard number 6 are always evident in our lessons. I said again, standard number 1 and standard number 6 should be evident in every lesson that we conduct into our classes. Okay, before we actually look at the answer and talk about some of those questions and how the students answer, some strategies that you could use to address the problem. Now, I am providing this problem solving framework, and it is adapted from Robert Kaplinski. If you have had the opportunity to look at the Georgia DOE frameworks, you've seen some of those 3-act tasks or even some of those tasks from Dan Meyer that are integrated in those frameworks. But this is a problem solving framework that he presented to us in a workshop a couple of months ago. And on the framework, it says, what problem are you trying to figure out? So this is what we will be doing with our students, asking that question after we presented a constructive response assessment item. And of course, that is, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to figure out? So that's a simple one. What guesses do we have? Now, when we look at this one, What we are aiming to do in our classes is to create more dialogue among the students. So every student has the opportunity to participate. And how we will kind of work this into our teaching is we have a question in front of the students and we've identified what the problem is trying to figure out. We want to gather responses from all students, which means those are our guesses. So if one student starts off by providing an answer that is 10, and what you want to do is poll the class and ask them, okay, well, students, how many have answers that are less than 10? And you continue doing this process until you have gathered all the lowest answer from 10. So say their answer may be 5. So what you would do now is ask the class, okay, well, what students have answers that are greater than 10? And you continue doing this until you have the highest answer, and say their answer may be 20. So now you have gathered everybody's response in the class. You've created that dialogue and no student feels like they have been left out. So now you can say, okay, class, we know that our answer is between 5 and 20. And then you can move on. But we're encouraging students by doing this, by being more active listeners, participants in what you're currently doing. Now, the next is, what do you already know from the problem? These are specific things that we can pick out inside of the assessment item. What do you need to know to solve the problem? Once again, that addresses one of those standards for mathematical practice. If the student can tell you, okay, what they need in order to solve the problem, then you know that they're on the right track, or they're trying to attempt to come up with the problem. What should we title this problem or lesson? By this point in the process, this question comes up just to go back and refocus the students back on what we're actually trying to do. Provide all of your work while working on the problem. You should provide a section or a time period at this time for the students to work the problem out the best way that they know how. It could be drawing diagrams, it could be writing out little notes, but anything that will help them solve the question, give them the opportunity to do that at this time. And what is your conclusion, and how did you reach that conclusion? Now, the last bulleted item is designed for students to write their response in complete sentences. Once again, this problem solving framework is not the end. Is not the framework. There are other resources that are out there that some teachers are using. Now, what I would ask is, if you are using an effective problem solving framework, then please send that to me so I can send that out to the whole group. But the one that's presented to you now can be used in whole group, small group, individual, can be used on skill work, and also if you are actually incorporating the frameworks, this can be used as well. Right, the example rubric. Now this rubric, once again, is from the Engage New York. I will be providing different versions of rubrics. The Georgia DOE, on their recently released webinars, they have a different rubric. So once again, is you kind of use whatever you feel is appropriate for what you're trying to do in your class. But for this one, is off of a 2-point rubric. So we'll go through and talk about what what the response would look like if the student earned a 2. So this response, if it earned 2 points, indicates that the student has completed the task correctly using mathematically sound procedures, contains sufficient work to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts and/or procedures, and may contain inconsequential errors that do not distract from the correct solution and the demonstration of a thorough understanding. Now, if a student scores a 1, then the response correctly addresses only some elements of the task. It may contain an incorrect solution, but applies a mathematically appropriate process to get to the answer. And it may contain the correct solution, but required work is incomplete. So they may be missing a few things. And if a student scores a 0, the response is incorrect, irrelevant, incoherent, or contains a correct solution obtained using an obviously incorrect procedure. And it just says some elements may contain correct mathematical procedures, but when you look at it holistically, they pretty much do not demonstrate that they have a clear understanding of what the mathematical concepts are in the task. So did anybody come up with the answer? If you did, go ahead and type that in real fast. Okay, let's look at, we have a few more minutes. Yes, let's look at the scored student work for student number 1. And this student scored 2 points out of 2. So the first thing that the student provided was an actual rectangular figure. And on the inside, you see that A is equal to 3/5. And then on the outside, they have the length is equal to 7/8 of a mile. And then you had to figure out what the width was. So their first step was to actually do 3/5 divided by 7/8. And they went on to do 3/5 times 8/7 and got 24 out of 35. And that is their answer. But let's notice one thing right here is they actually went on ahead and checked their work using the answer that they came from to see if they came back up with the area. So they have 7/8 times 24/35, and then they went down and simplified, did all of their math, and ended up with 3/5. So we know that that is the correct answer. The feedback that was provided for the student is the response demonstrates a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts embodied in the task. The answer, which is 24/35, is correct, and the work shown is a mathematically sound procedure. So now we have an idea of what would be like an exemplary. Scored student work number 2. This student scored a 1 out of 2 points. And let's look at what they provided as an answer. 3/5 divided by 7/8. And they have 3/5 times 8/7 and came up with 24/35. The response demonstrates only a partial understanding of the mathematical concepts. The answer 5/3 is incorrect. However, the work that was shown to get them here, the 3/5 times 8/7, to get 24/35 was a sound procedure, and the calculation was right, but the error occurred when they wanted to simplify the 24/35, resulting in an incorrect answer. And scored student work number 3. First, the student scored a 0 out of 2 points. And let's start here with the actual formula for area. A equals L times W. The substitution of the dimensions were correct. 3/5 was the area, and then the length was 7/8 times your width. The actual response to the question was incorrect because their answer was 35/100. The fractions are correctly substituted into the area formula, but of course we see that even though the substitution was correct, this alone is not sufficient to demonstrate even a limited understanding of the mathematical concepts. We're coming out with the answer 35/100. Okay, before we finish with the webinar, let's talk about feedback. It is a very important thing that we do in our classes is to provide the students with feedback. We know currently as we are integrated into the TKES, then as teachers, we're being evaluated, and we want to be provided with feedback from our evaluator to see how can we increase, how can we grow, how can we improve. So I think the students deserve the same thing. So written or verbal feedback must be frequently given. Every student is due that. It may not occur every single day, but it should occur quite frequently. And as stated, it could be written or verbal, but at some point in time, they definitely have to have some written. Feedback must be provided to tell the student their next steps in moving towards mastering the standard. You providing that feedback to let them know, hey, if you are You're currently at this point. So these are the steps that you need to do in order to move to mastery of that standard. What I am not saying is provide these specific steps. So if a student has presented a problem and they have it incorrect as far as the answer, and they may have just maybe added or subtracted incorrectly. What you want to do is just bring it to their attention that your process was correct, but there was a mistake maybe in your calculation. But do not tell them exactly where that error occurred. And lastly, with feedback is use the language of the standards when providing that feedback. So when you are giving that student that written feedback, provide the language that is actually used in the standards to help them, to become more familiar with the standards that they're working on. And lastly, just to talk about this webinar and the resources or the references. As stated before, the assessment items for this month are being sampled from the Engage New York curriculum. I provided the website for you. The Georgia Frameworks and the Shell Mathematics Assessment Projects. The Shell Mathematics Projects are those files. Those are integrated into your Georgia Frameworks. And I added them to the reference page just in case I am able to bring those to you, or if I'm not. The last website is the Georgia DOE Archive webinars. They have released webinars for the elementary grade level, the middle school grade level, and the high school grade level. And it just provides you with additional prototypes or just items that you can review that will help you to kind of, bring those constructive response items into your classes. Now, if there are no questions, once again, this is the end of our webinar, and I do appreciate you taking this time out on your Friday to join me. Once again, there will be a link uploaded to the webinar, and I will send the access to the link after it has been uploaded. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you so much for joining us. See you next month.